Final video with respect to cellular respiration, and it'll be short and sweet, and it's going to be about anaerobic respiration. And anaerobic respiration means no oxygen is present. All right, so typically normal cells are going to die in an anaerobic environment, but a few cells can actually survive, and then there is a whole segment of the organism population who cannot live in the presence of oxygen. Okay, so we have obligate, literally like obligated, so obligate anaerobes, one type of organism, or we have anaerobes. All right, and so these are your two categories of organisms who are able to do anaerobic respiration. So most of them cannot do it at all, but obligates can only do anaerobic. Anaerobic. Okay. If there's oxygen present, they'll die, and it just doesn't work for them. The facultative ones are temporary. So these are like your muscle cells. With anaerobic, we have happens first, and glycolysis, if you remember, is where you take the 1, 2, 3, 4 sugar, okay, and he's going to have attached to him. 6H12O6, and it's still going to come to the mitochondria, except that glycolysis happens in the cytosol, and it's where this sugar gets split, and it gets split into 2 3-carbon sugars, and these are called pyruvic acid or pyruvate. All right, so that's the glycolysis. That doesn't change no matter what's happening. All right. Now, if oxygen was present, into Krebs cycle, and then it's going to go into electron transport chain. All right, but no oxygen, we have a couple of options. Typical option is death. Okay, cells die. They get poisoned and they cannot deal with the excess amount of hydrogen inside of them, and so they poison, denature, and just essentially stop working. But these couple of cells who are able to do cellular respiration in the absence of oxygen can come up with 2 different products. So in alcohol, or alcoholic fermentation, after glycolysis, these pyruvic acids get assimilated and they get turned into ethyl alcohol or ethanol. Right, and it's not a very complex process. It's a very similar molecule. Ethanol is C2H4, and then with 1 oxygen, so it just gets changed around a little bit, but it only gets 2 ATP, so not a lot of energy. So those are not very large organisms, and as we talked about in the previous video, the only organism that can do this is yeast, and yeast is tiny, and we use it to make bread, and so when we're making bread and we mix the yeast with the sugar and flour, the bread rises, and that's because in this process in making the pyruvates into alcohol, they release carbon dioxide because they remove some of that carbon and oxygen from these pyruvic acids so that they can make it into ethanol. And so the bread rises because the yeast is actually exhaling and breathing. If you were to cut off their supply of oxygen, they would still exhale and breathe. All right, the second possible path, here I'll do it in a different color, is lactic acid fermentation. Do glycolysis, you get 2 pyruvic acids, but then you can turn the pyruvic acid into lactic acid, or lactate. And that is a C3 molecule that they've taken some of the CO2 off of. Okay? And so your muscle cells can survive and still keep working, and they'll make that lactic acid and it'll build up in your muscles. But that's only temporary. Do not want that to happen forever, or else your muscles will run out of this possibility and you'll die. Sometimes this can be why people's bodies will twitch after they die, because their muscles are still doing cellular respiration even though there is no oxygen coming in. All right, if you have any questions about any of it, there are some fabulous diagrams in your book. Page 156 is a diagram of alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. And then on page 159, there's an overview of everything.